He was the man who spent a lifetime telling other people's stories on screen. And in the years after the cameras turned away from him, Randolph Mantooth began to tell a different story, the one about the pain he carried and how he chose to live with it. Randolph Mantooth will always be remembered first by many as John Gage, the strong but sensitive paramedic from Emergency. In the 1970s, that role turned him into a fixture in American living rooms, and it also shaped the way he saw his own responsibility. Playing a first responder on television drew him toward real first responders in life. For decades after the show ended, he used his name and his time to speak to EMS workers, firefighters, and medical professionals, thanking them for the work they do when no cameras are rolling. Those speeches, those convention appearances, became a second chapter in his career. Underneath that public gratitude, though, he was carrying something heavy. Later in life, Randolph revealed that he had been diagnosed with cancer. When he first received the news, he chose to share it only with a small circle of family and close friends. He went through treatment quietly, asking those around him to respect his privacy and to support him without turning his illness into a public drama. When he eventually spoke about it, he did so in the same calm, direct way that defined his best performances, acknowledging the diagnosis, describing the treatment, and expressing thanks that he had made it through that particular storm. Even after he finished treatment, the experience stayed with him. At an EMS event some years later, he stood up at a dinner and told the room that he was still recovering, that cancer had taken a toll on his body and his energy. He talked about how, in earlier years, he could do more than 20 public events in 1 year, traveling, speaking, shaking hands, spending hours with the people who had embraced Emergency as part of their own identity. Now, he said, he was cutting that number down, choosing around 10 appearances instead. It was a small, matter-of-fact way of admitting that he no longer had the same reserves, that something in him had changed. There was more pain, too. In messages he shared with fans, Randolph mentioned the loss of his sister, Nancy, who had faced her own serious illness. The grief of watching a sibling go through that kind of struggle is not something that disappears when the treatments end or the obituary is written. For him, it became part of the weight he carried, another layer of understanding about what families go through when health becomes fragile, another reason to speak so gently about the work of people who respond to emergencies every day. And yet, the pain did not turn him inward or bitter. When he finally spoke publicly about his diagnosis and recovery, his words were focused less on what the disease had taken from him and more on what had helped him endure it. The support of family and friends, the respect shown by those who honored his wish for privacy, and the quiet determination to get back to something like normal life. He admitted that he had days when he didn't feel strong, times when the recovery felt longer than he had hoped, but he kept emphasizing that he was moving forward feeling stronger, step by step. In interviews about his career, Randolph also spoke about a different kind of pain, the stretches of his life when the work itself felt empty. He described periods when he was taking roles just to pay the bills, feeling disconnected from what he was putting on screen, wanting out of the business altogether. Those admissions were striking because they came from someone fans often assumed had loved every minute of his journey. By saying that some years had been pretty dismal, that he had once just been doing it for the money, he let people see the emotional cost behind a long career. Taken together, all of this forms a picture of a man who did not pretend pain didn't exist. He acknowledged illness, loss, disappointment, and fatigue. He carried them with him into his later years, but he also kept looking outward, toward the EMS community he cherished, toward the fans who still remembered Emergency, toward the family who stood beside him both when things were good and when they were very hard. Randolph Mantooth shared the pain he carried not to shock or to dramatize, but to be honest. In doing so, he gave the people who admired him something more than a character on a screen. He gave them a human being who had suffered, recovered, grieved, and continued to show up, even when showing up meant admitting that he was not the same as he used to be. Rest in peace, Randolph Mantooth. Thank you for watching.